Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. It's where we talk all things financial goals. Before we get started, please note these videos do not constitute financial advice. If you're in need of financial advice, please contact a registered financial advisor. Let's get started. Now, today we're talking about putting our money not necessarily in investments, but in an emergency fund. Now, when I started this financial independence journey, if you're not sure what that is, check out this video where we talk about exactly what financial independence is and how we're gonna do it on this channel. I started learning about this concept of an emergency fund, right? And yeah, labels, savings, emergency fund. But I think when you label something very specifically, it also makes you understand when to use it and when not to. And so I like that we call this an emergency fund because it's in the name, emergency. And we'll discuss what constitutes an emergency. But there's this belief that you need to have this stash of money somewhere that you can use in the event of an emergency and that you're not necessarily investing. And there's a reason for that. So we're going to discuss emergency funds today. So what is an emergency fund? Put simply, it's an easily accessible pool of funds that you can utilize in an emergency. Now, the rule of thumb is typically 3 to 6 months of expenses, and there's no hard rule. You can decide what you think constitutes an emergency and how much you'd like to save. So 3 to 6 months of expenses. When we say expenses, we're not just saying like generally expenses. I would think anything you need to stay alive, really. Housing, food, transport. I don't want to say clothing, because if you have clothes, you don't need more clothes. Unless you need a jersey because it's snowing and you don't own a jersey. Sure. But in an emergency, you probably just use the clothes you have. So really the basics to stay alive, right? So what constitutes an emergency? That was something that I needed to figure out for myself. It was really, really big question that I had. And from reading a lot, obviously people have different definitions. To me, I would say the biggest emergency is losing your job. So if you were to lose your job, this emergency fund should be able to carry you for however long you've budgeted. So if you're saying you've saved 3 months of expenses, you should be able to survive for 3 months without having to get another job, right? Not to say you're not looking, maybe you're looking, but it's taking you a while. So that's what an emergency fund is to me, and that's what an emergency is. But in addition to that, I think an emergency is also large capital expenditures that are unexpected. So sorry, I just thought of something and it triggered me because it's still so fresh. No, the other day somebody drove into my car. It's not even the other day, it was probably 2 months ago. But yeah, no, I'm so annoyed. I'm still annoyed to this day. So somebody drove into my car. Luckily, everyone is fine. Nothing bad happened. It was literally at a robot. So unnecessary. Drove into the back of my car. I'll share a picture. Should I do that? I don't know. But somebody drove into the back of my car and it needed to be repaired. I immediately, called insurance. I'd like to get this fixed. It looks horrible. My car's white. It's gorgeous. I need it to be fixed. And then, of course, you don't just have insurance. You also have an excess, right? You need to pay a certain amount in addition to what they're going to pay for them to fix the car. Now, in my case, it was somebody else's fault, so they technically need to pay the excess if they have insurance. My insurance can go claim it from them, but that's a process and it won't necessarily work out. I was very lucky it worked out and I got my excess back, but I still had to pay it, right? And just hope I get it back, and if I don't, I don't. But your excess can be anywhere from say 3,000 Rand to 5,000 Rand, just depending on your insurance. And when something like that comes up, you might not be in a cash flush position. So, those kind of things, a geyser bursting, and they're like 10,000 Rand to fix, or, those large sort of expenses, not wanting a new fridge, no, but maybe load shedding, power surge, and your fridge breaks. Now you need a fridge. Fridges are not cheap. Emergency, right? So why do you need an emergency fund? Well, all those emergencies we were talking about, right? If those come up and you need a 5,000, 10,000 rand quickly, the thing we don't want to do is be dipping, number one, into debt, right? Because if we're into debt, then we are paying interest. And remember, we are not wasting money on interest in 2021. Check out this video where I speak about all the things we should not be wasting money on in 2021. The second thing you could probably do is dip into your investments. No, don't do that. The problem with that is, first of all, you're hoping for good timing, right? You could be in a down cycle. So maybe you put 1,000 rand into your investments, and right now they're only worth 700 rand, because that's what happens when you're investing. There's cycles. You don't want to be forced to withdraw at 700 rand and lock in that 300 rand loss, right? However, you could be in an upcycle, which is a fabulous thing. But what does that mean? If we're selling off our investments, we're incurring capital gains taxes. And that's also something we don't want to be doing. And we don't want to be missing out on future growth in our investments and, future dividends on those amounts. So we don't want to be dipping into our investments. And that is why we want to have an emergency fund, so that if these things come up, we're able to take care of them without having to dip into our investments or go into debt. So now that we know what an emergency fund is, we know what it's all about. How do we save for one, or how do we get to our number, right? So my suggestion to you would be to download your bank statements, 3 to 6 months of bank statements, and classify your expenses. The debit orders are quite simple, and a lot of your living expenses will be based on debit orders. What you'll need to figure out is sort of how much have you been swiping for food and all of that, and what makes sense. Once you get to that sort of monthly amount, if you look at it month on month, it should be about the same. If it's not, you could take an average. And then this next part is completely personal. You need to decide how much you want to save in your emergency fund. At a minimum, I would think you need to at least aim for 3 months. And I hate talking about this damn pandemic, but it really did show that anything can happen, and we need to be prepared for these emergencies. So it's a lot of money, but it can really make a big difference. So figure out how much you think you would need to come out from an emergency. If that emergency is losing your job, right? In most cases, hopefully the emergency is more those once-off capex requirements. So once you've decided that, we now need to save towards it. And this is really where people sort of struggle with, okay, now I'm saving in this emergency fund that's not being invested, it's not growing. I mean, interest rates are down now. You might get 2%, 3%, 4% if you're lucky and you lock it away long enough. Or I could be investing it, but then it'll go up and down, and then I need to dip into it, and then it's down, and which one am I doing? You can do both once you've saved 1 month of expenses. So save that 1 month of expenses, and once you get to that, you can now start saying, okay, now I'm putting a little bit towards my emergency fund and a little bit towards investing. A little bit. It'll take you longer to grow your emergency fund, but at least you're covered in terms of a base of emergencies, right? And I mean, that's different for everyone. If you have a lot of emergencies that come around, maybe family always requires something from you or something like that, then maybe you need to focus on building that emergency fund first. But if you can be relatively sure that, what, if I look at my insurance or my excess is all 5,000 rand and below, if I can just have 7,000 rand in an emergency fund and then build on that, I'm happy. And then that's how you can get to the 7,000 and then start splitting it out and be like, okay, I'm putting a little bit towards emergency fund, a little bit towards investing, so that you're not missing out. I mean, on down cycles where you could be investing and making your money grow. But some people are very adamant that they will start with an emergency fund, get that to where it needs to be, then pay off debt, get that to where it needs to be, then start investing, get that to where it needs to be. So that's something you need to evaluate for your journey. I hope that video was helpful and you were able to understand exactly what emergency fund is, why it's so important, and I really hope you will begin your journey on building your own emergency fund. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please like, share, and subscribe. You can click on the notification bell so you'll be notified every time I upload a new video. Thank you so much for watching.